What if I told you there's a small island in the middle of the ocean with only one tree growing on it and 550 feral horses that call the place home? Would you think that's strange? What if I told you that there were 350 ships that were wrecked all around this island? Stay tuned because we're talking about it today on the Weekly Strange. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Weekly Strange. I'm your host, Jon F. Merz, author, actor, adventurer. You know, this show is all about the stuff that I come across. As a writer of novels and books and screenplays, I come across some really weird stuff in the course of researching my various projects. So this show is all about some of the strange things I discover as I write. Some of these are true facts that not a lot of people know about. Some are weird news stories. Some are, like last week's show, outright lies, and others are just outright bizarre and can't be categorized at all, except that they're, well, strange. We'll cover them all in forthcoming episodes, but for right now, let's take a trip, you and I, to a small island off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada. Sable Island lies about 175 kilometers off the eastern coast of Nova Scotia, smack dab in the middle of the North Atlantic. Sable Island means island of sand because it's sort of more of a sandbar than what you might picture an actual island looking like. In fact, one of its claims to fame is that more than 350 shipwrecks have occurred around the island because of the heavy fog, really treacherous currents, and the sandbars that exist there. Now, Sable Island lies right in the middle of a major shipping route and has been sinking ships for hundreds of years. Approaching Sable Island from the air, you can even see some of these shipwrecks, like the 1905 wreck of the Skidby languishing in the shallows as seals swim all around them. Sable Island it's shaped like a crescent, like the bottom part of the letter U. At its highest point, Bald Dune, it's only about 100 feet in elevation. And at its widest point, it's little more than a mile, despite being almost 27 miles long. Now, because of its location roughly 200 miles away from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Sable Island gets nailed with hurricanes and nor'easters pretty regularly. Combined with its proximity to the continental shelf, the treacherous current, an abundance of fog during bad days, and more, it's no wonder that a lot of ships have met their fate here. In July of 2024, the bodies of Sarah Packwood and her husband Brett Clibbery were found in a lifeboat that washed up on the shore of Sable Island. They had left Nova Scotia a month previously bound for the Azores, but on June 18th they were reported missing and presumably encountered some mishap in their yacht, the Theros. Fortunately, thanks to advances in navigational technology, the number of shipwrecks has fallen dramatically in the last several decades. Nowadays, there is only one permanently staffed outpost on the island, Sable Island Station, which is run by Parks Canada. Sable Island Station conducts extensive scientific experiments on a wide range of topics and fields, including weather, upper atmosphere research, fog chemistry, stuff about the Earth's magnetic fields and climate. There is an airfield of sorts on the island, and it's here that the island staff get supplies delivered twice each month. But despite having a 24-meter diameter concrete helipad, there is no permanent runway for the fixed-wing aircraft that bring supplies in. As such, most times the planes land on the hard-packed sand of South Beach. Sand that must be checked in person by an island researcher prior to any plane landing. So along with the fact that the island boasts an unusual number of shipwrecks, what else makes it, strange? Well, how about a population of 550 feral horses that have pretty much free reign, pun intended, of the island? These horses, a special unique breed known as the Sable Island horse, are protected by law from human interference. but they are not indigenous to the island itself. Instead, most believe that they were likely left on the island during the expulsion of Acadians from Nova Scotia and elsewhere by Great Britain between 1755 to 1764. This is likely where the cattle that used to roam the island also came from. But there are no more cows on Sable Island, just the horses. And since Sable Island lacks natural trees, the horses instead graze on the marram grass that grows all over the island and drink from one of several freshwater ponds that teem with life. Not to say that people haven't tried to plant trees. In fact, more than 80,000 of them were planted there in 1901, but they all died. And subsequent attempts to stabilize the soil using trees has largely failed, except for a single solitary Scots pine. Planted in the 1960s, it has remained only a few feet tall. Nevertheless, its presence is appreciated by the Sable Island station staff, and the tree is decorated for Christmas each year. Now, the horses share their island home with harbor and gray seals, which use the expansive shoreline to breed. Sable Island is actually the largest gray seal breeding colony on Earth, and you can see them frolicking in the surf as you approach the island from the air. And even when you land, the plane is only yards away from seals basking in the warm sand. Now, the presence of these seals naturally draws in predators who feed on them. According to reports, most scientists believe that the Greenland shark is responsible for most of the deaths of the seals that they see. But given the fact that great white sharks are now routinely found in the waters around Nova Scotia, and even further north, I'd bet good money that they're also visiting Sable Island for a hearty meal. Maybe something to look for on the next Shark Week on the Discovery Channel. There are also several large bird colonies like terns on the island, but apart from the seals and birds, the horses have the place pretty much to themselves. But for how much longer? That's a good question, because of the fact that Sable Island is pretty much just a low-lying sandbar. It's extremely vulnerable to any change in sea levels resulting from climate change. There's also the fact that because of climate change, the island is seeing more ferocious storms that contribute to erosion that is unable to be stemmed or at least thwarted by the presence of trees in their root systems. It's because of these factors that many believe that by the end of this century, Sable Island will no longer exist, having been slowly eroded by the relentless waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Given that Sable Island is known as the graveyard of the Atlantic, rumors of paranormal activity abound. Ghostly images and specters are reported across the island, as perhaps the spirits of those poor souls lost in shipwrecks seek some sort of solace in this ever-shifting island purgatory. But if you believe that residual energies can cling to a location, then surely the most famous reason for ghosts at Sable Island would be when it was used as a French penal colony back toward the end of the 16th century. 70 prisoners were deposited on Sable Island and left to fend for themselves. King Henry IV and the man in charge of the penal colony, the Marquis de Roche, failed to resupply the prisoners with food and basic necessities for a full year. Those prisoners, left without any resources or means for survival, devolved into the most primal versions of man. Overthrowing the two leaders of the colony and their allies, the island quickly became a bloodbath. Murder and starvation ruled the day, with prisoners battling for any scraps they could find. They clubbed seals and wore their skins, desperate to cling to life. Out of the 70 that had been sent to Sable Island, only 11 survived when the French finally returned a year later. The penal colony's priest, a Franciscan friar, survived, but he refused to leave the island after witnessing the tragic and bloodthirsty conditions that the men endured. Reports about that priest's ghostly apparition can be seen to this day, walking the sand dunes of Sable Island. And then there's the story of Lady Copeland, who was the sole survivor of the Princess Amelia that was wrecked in 1801. Legend has it that Lady Copeland clung to wreckage and managed to get close to shore, where she was noticed struggling in the surf by a notorious island dweller and pirate who waded out, dragged her ashore, only to murder her in the surf and sand. With his eyes glued to the extraordinary ring that Lady Copeland wore, he tried his best to pry it off. Failing that, he cut off her finger and stole the ring. Ever since that time, reports of a ghostly woman with only 9 fingers had been commonplace on the island. Supposedly, though, Lady Copeland's ring was eventually discovered for sale in an antique shop in Halifax, and once it was returned to the descendants of Lady Copeland, the reports of her ghostly image walking Sable Island ceased. There's also the story of the coxswain who drowned near what was once the East End Lighthouse. For a time, when there were rescue stations on the island, the ghostly image of a man would suddenly appear in the lifeboats as they rowed out to shipwrecks, only to disappear on their way back in with the survivors. And throughout its history, Sable Island has been a rendezvous for pirates and other rogues who use the island as a temporary shelter of sorts, or to evade pursuers who were reluctant to venture toward the graveyard of the Atlantic. So what if you'd like to visit this peculiar island? Is it easy to get to? Actually, it's only accessible by air or sea, and before you can even think about plotting a course, you need to obtain explicit permission from Parks Canada. Once you have that, you can plan out a trip. Parks Canada will be happy to recommend one of several tour operators that service Sable Island. However, overnight stays are not permitted. Well, not unless the unpredictable weather interferes and forces you to delay your departure. In that case, there are means to house you, but they will be Spartan. You'll also be charged for that overnight stay. Parks Canada doesn't want anything or anyone compromising the ecosystem of the island, and for that reason, tourism is strictly regulated. If you choose to sail to Sable Island, then you can, of course, anchor offshore and stay as long as you'd like, provided you obtain the necessary permission to do so. Sable Island also has extra emergency aviation fuel at their heliport, and this is used to assist Canadian Coast Guard in staging from the island to search further out into the Atlantic in the case of emergencies. It was also used as an evacuation point for oil rigs that worked in the area until 2018 for ExxonMobil. Those drills have now all been plugged, and given Sable Island's national park status, no drilling is permitted in the immediate area around the island. If you'd like to check out Sable Island, this strange sandbar island in the middle of the ocean, 200 miles or so from Halifax, Nova Scotia, you can do so without leaving the comfort of your home. In 2016, Google Street View added a hiking tour of the island. This was facilitated by a Parks Canada employee walking through the center of the island, wearing a backpack rig similar to what Google uses for its Google Street View cars. The tour itself can be viewed by going to the official Sable Island website, which will link you to several multimedia videos and photos that give you a fantastic overview. With its ever-shifting sands and dunes that are eroded almost at the same time as others are being built, the island is a source of mystery and beauty set out into the North Atlantic Ocean. With more than 500 years of colorful history and an inherent beauty all its own, Sable Island is a stark reminder of the frailty of both the world around us and human nature. And that's going to do it for this episode of The Weekly Strange. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out our other shows on this channel, like The Other Side of Midnight, where we talk to callers all about their paranormal experiences, and The Hunted, where we talk about true crime fugitives still on the run from justice. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our uploads. For now, I'm Jon F. Merz. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.